So today you should be fairly well along on your final project, your final design project. I'm not expecting it to be done, though the further along you are, the better the settings will be. The point being that when we start to go through these days of creating a good exterior day rendering, then we'll move into creating a good interior day rendering, then we'll move into creating a good interior night rendering, or exterior night rendering, and vice versa. So there's a lot of things that are going to be coming. You shouldn't stop working on this project. You should keep working on it. The more detailed it is, the better your renderings will be. You will also find that you have control over what views are being rendered. Therefore, you can put more detail in some places and much less in other places. The example that I'll show you of the one that I'm going to render and play around with, I've been using for a couple semesters, though every semester I tend to add a little bit more to it. It's fairly well resolved. Let me switch into just shaded mode here for a second. It's fairly well resolved, but I have this building over here in the corner that's half buried in the hill that has absolutely no detail in it whatsoever. It just is there, and I don't know what it is yet. I haven't figured it out. But some of these other rooms actually have a fair amount of detail in them. Other versions of this file have even more detail in them in terms of furniture and that sort of thing as part of the rendering process. We're starting to get into the part of the semester where the network rendering is going to be very valuable. You will see when I do some test renderings of this how valuable it is. And so we will reinforce and go over how that works. Currently, computers ET103 1 to 20 have all been I redid them this morning, so they all have a Q drive that won't get confused with any other Q drive. You can name those computers by name and make sure you get those as part of the network render, and you can harness some pretty good power out of those. I will continue working with the rest of this room and then the other rooms as we get a little bit closer. So anyway, I'm going to take you through several different things today. Some of this I'm going to skip over because I'm sure you guys are familiar with it by now, like the HDRI environment, the sun system, those kinds of things. I'm going to ask you to start setting those up today as well. Assigning appropriate material is relatively obvious. So I'm going to concentrate on a couple of other things. One is once you start putting in things like rocks and grass and those things that really enhance your rendering, how to do that. We'll talk about that today. I'm also going to talk about how do you get your building and site to mesh together well. And so we'll kind of cover some of those technicalities. Then we'll get into some rendering and some tweaking settings and that sort of thing. Let's get started. I have a version of this file that has no terrain in it. It actually has a terrain layer, but there's nothing on it. Contains the rest of my building, so to speak. Now, I'm anticipating this building nesting into the hillside a bit. So I've stacked the building in such a way that I have, downstairs and upstairs on this wing. Here we can switch into ghosted mode. Well, maybe even let's do X-ray. You can kind of see here. I have 2 floors in that front. It could be 2 bedrooms or something. I don't really know. I have this cavern in the back, and I've got a set of staircase that's in this kind of glass bridge between the two. As kind of the basic pieces of information. I've got a few retaining walls that I put in, and I've got some foundations that go down pretty deep such that they could intersect the topography a bit. And I've spent a little bit of time staring at the topography, kind of have a good idea of where I want to place this. So it's approximately correct. But we want to think about how do we mesh the two together nicely. And so in your site download information, you do have the SketchUp file. And you guys remember back to when we built the terrain models, how we created a NURB surface out of the SketchUp terrain. I've gone ahead and I've done that, and I have a terrain that's been cleaned up. This is a NURB surface based exactly on that terrain, using the contour method, trimming it, using a curved network to create the terrain itself. And I have this saved as a file called terrain.3dm. The only layer there is just terrain. Has no texture applied to it, no color. If we switched into rendered mode, it's just default white, nothing particularly fancy about it. Okay. I have that all saved. I'm assuming that you guys can create this file by now. We've gone through it enough times, so I'm not going to go back through it. If I actually went through all of these step by step, you guys would listen to me for the full 3 hours and not do anything. So that's why I'm skipping through some steps, right? So this is ready for me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it into this model file where I've built my building. Could I do it the opposite way? Absolutely. The reason that I'm doing it this way, Stephen and I actually had a good conversation last class about what the right strategy was. Do you bring the terrain into the model? Do you bring the model into the terrain long term? The truth is, when we get to lighting, we want to be able to put the lighting in the final rendered file. And so because we want it to be in the final rendered file, I want to have access to all of this, because I'm going to be moving lights around and that sort of thing. So this is going to be my final rendered file, and I'll bring in the other pieces of it. So I'm in my building site. You'll notice that 0, 0 is right here at the corner of my building. So the terrain is going to work around that particular point. When I go to File and then Insert, I can then go pick that terrain. So let me go to 136. Let me go to 223, and let me pick the terrain file. I'll go ahead and say open, and I'll go ahead and say OK, and OK, and it will come in. And for right now, I'm just going to place it somewhere right on my site. We can kind of see that my building is floating here, right? And I'm going to have to adjust this terrain. Now, I don't want to rotate the terrain because my north and south is set. In my building, that's the way I want it. But what I am going to do is, I know that I'm shooting to nestle my building kind of right here on that terrain. So I'm going to move this terrain around a bit so that it starts to get closer to my building, right? And it's going to take a little bit of finessing to get it in the right spot. So let's keep moving it closer to me here, right? And so I'm starting to get there. And let me switch views here. I don't know what the right view is. I might do shaded view to see it a little bit better. Let me go ahead and do a little bit more moving here.
Why didn't you import it as a block?
It is a block right now.
Oh, okay.
I just when I said insert, when I said file insert, it is a block.
Oh.
So I can keep moving it and tweaking it a little bit. Now, as I get in here a little bit closer, I do want some of my building partially buried. Right? I kind of designed the building around that concept. But I have to be a little bit careful about where the terrain is cutting through my building. So I have this little retaining wall that's been put in right here. Right? Likewise, I've got the back corner of this building kind of being buried a little bit. So I'm starting to get pretty happy. Obviously, the terrain goes right through the center of my building. It's going to do that for a while. The other factor here is that this isn't long enough right now. So I would consider extending that. I can also consider moving where I am on the site slightly. Let's move vertically. Let's pull that up a little bit. So I'm just lowering myself down a little bit. Let's move over towards the edge. And so this is it takes a little bit of patience to find the right spot on the site. And so I'm going to keep adjusting, keep tweaking. So obviously now it's a little bit lower on the site. If I come back here, right, that's okay, that's okay. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. I'd like it to be a little bit different for this retaining wall because obviously it's diving. I was anticipating it being a little bit flatter. So I might continue moving it around. Let me go back. It was pretty good right here. Oops, let me go back one more. It was pretty good right there. If I have to extend that down a little bit, so be it. Not the end of the world. So the point is, I get it pretty close. And once I have it pretty close, I'm going to work in a separate layer that's just a temporary layer. And I'm going to draw, in the top view, the perimeter of my building. Okay, so let me jump over into the top view. Like this. Let me switch into just wireframe mode. And I'm going to use a polyline, and I'm going to draw around the perimeter of my building. Okay? And so we'll start here, and I'm going to draw. Now, in reality, this isn't going to line up perfectly. It's going to be going up and down, depending on where it snaps. I don't really care because, oh, you know what? I have a little bit of an overhang. I have to go to the purple lines and the blue lines. It's my fault. Because I'm going to ultimately project this line to the surface. So we'll go like this. Right, exactly. Come back there. Okay, there's that point. Now I also know I want a little bit finer control in this area because I want to adjust the terrain a little bit. So I'm actually going to create one more little poly surface here, or excuse me, polyline that goes right along here. Like that. Okay, so if we, let me select these curves that I just created so that we can see them. And when we look at them in the perspective view, see how they're all totally wonky, up, down, whatever? It doesn't matter because what I'm going to use is I'm going to use those curves and project them onto this surface. So I'll look down on this surface, I'll type project, and I'm going to project it onto this surface. So I'll hit enter, and it will then project some nice little curves right onto my surface for me. Okay, which is perfect. I could go as far as turning off everything but the terrain. It looks like it came in on the wrong layer. I'll have to sort that out. And so I have those that have been set, and I can use those as splitting objects. So let me type split, select the terrain. Okay, so here's a good point. It's not going to let me select the terrain because it's a block. And because I'm now going to work with it, I'm going to go ahead and explode the block, which is going to embed it into my file. There's nothing I can really do about it because I want to cut that part of the terrain out. So I'm going to go ahead and go to explode. And from there, I can go to split. And I'm going to select that and that. I'll hit enter. And it will then give me separate pieces for here, right? Let's start with this one. I'm just going to delete it. And when I turn back on my building, there, we can see that it fits into that little split. Okay, I need to turn on my landscape. There's my walls. Right, it'll disappear for a second. So there it is. So that fits in nicely. It's no longer cutting through the building. Right. I have this piece which is a little bit separate. So I'm going to make some tweaks on this because I'm not particularly happy with where it is right now. So let me go ahead, oh, and I should have trimmed off that little piece. This is going to be a problem piece down the road. See that little piece? Mm-hmm. I should have gotten rid of that because it's sticking up through my wall. So in reality, I should probably make a quick little, do it top view here, do a quick little polyline to project here. Project onto the surface. There it is. All right, let me do a split of the surface. You can tell that this gets more complicated when you have a lot more objects. So split. Take that piece of it and get rid of it, and now we can go back into shaded mode so we can see it. There we go, I got rid of that little piece. So I need to make a couple little tweaks to this piece. So I'm going to take this surface, I'm going to turn on my edit points, hopefully, or my control points. Right. If it's not going to play nice, that's okay, we can work it some other way. So let me go ahead and duplicate some edges. Duplicate my edge. I'm going to take that edge, which lines up there. I'm going to take this edge here. I'll take this edge and that edge. Take this, and I'll go ahead and hit enter. Gives me some curves to work with. Let me do a quick trim. And we'll get rid of that part of the curve, and we'll get rid of that part of the curve. There we go. Let me go ahead and join. Don't want to join this. deselect, deselect. I'm going to join these together because I want that bend right there because I want it to hit my intersection. Now I'm going to take this line here and that line there. Let me trim again. That. Okay, perfect. So now I have this edge, and then I'm just going to do a straight line from there to there. Pick that curve, this curve, this curve, and this curve. Oops, wrong one. Just the one at the top, and I'm going to do a curve network from that. Okay, and I'll build myself in a new little surface to work with. Get rid of that surface. Right, and so I'll build myself in a little new surface. Looks like this needs to come down a little bit more, so maybe I'll adjust that one a little bit. It's not as precise as I want. I'm pretty happy with it up there. So it'll take a little bit of tweaking to get it just right, which is fine. But that's part of how you do the integration of the site. Does that kind of make sense? So you keep adjusting, massaging, making those pieces work. If I need this to extend down a little bit further, not a problem. In this case, I'm just going to copy it from here, and we'll sink it down right below itself, and that's fine, right? What happens underneath here makes no difference. Okay? So I start working through that, and I get that part right. Okay? Now the next part of this, once I've got this integrated into the site, is to try to customize it a little bit more. And so I'm actually going to switch from this to one that I've spent a little bit more time integrating right here into the site. So you can see that I've gone through the same process of making a few adjustments to make sure that this piece actually fits in correctly. My site fits in nicely. All right, if we spin around, it's intersecting well. It's right about where I wanted it to be, so I'm pretty happy. I've also spent time to establish materials and stuff, so if I were to render this, that would be ready to go. Likewise, I did go into my options, and under my environment, I have my HDRIs loaded up, so they're all ready to go. So I've done a lot of the prep work making this ready. So when I go through and I do the next phase and I do the renderings and I put the grass in and stuff, it's going to look pretty good already because I spent time getting it right before I did this. These kinds of adding grass and rocks and all that sort of thing are things that you'll want to do toward the end of the process. So you want your building to be fairly well evolved before you start wasting too much time on grass and what have you. The other truth of it, I'll be honest, it's pretty easy to Photoshop in this kind of stuff, but since this isn't a class about Photoshop, we're going to concentrate on making sure we can render everything. So a couple things that are the biggest challenges to render. One is the terrain itself and making it look like a nice grassy field. The other is the ocean or a pool or some kind of body of water. I've spent a lot of time trying to devise the right way to get good quality renderings out of that, and as a result, I've come up with a few strategies for how it would work. So under exercise 223 at the bottom here, I have links to download the ocean Rhino block and the bunch grass Rhino block. Okay, both of which are things that I created that hopefully will help you. Okay, the ocean, if we click on it, is going to look something like this. I did a quick rendering so you can kind of see what it looks like. It's an undulating body of water. It's not particularly rough, but it'll work. It'll give us the right reflections and it'll look approximately correctly. I do have other, if we go into Rhino blocks, if the website doesn't crash on me, I will be very curious if it works better today because I worked on it all weekend or all the last 2 days. So we'll see. There are a bunch of other kind of these same kind of blocks if you're trying to do like a pool or a water fountain or something like that. They should exist here under landscape. It looks like I only have the 2 posted. I have some other ocean ones that will work for, instead of an ocean, it'll work for a pool or it'll work for a fountain or that sort of thing. So, anyway, I'm trying to make it easy on you. The other one is this bunch grass, which is grass looking thing. And we can use that in a repeated manner in certain areas of the drawing to get pretty good grass results. You can use something similar to create like a lawn, but I want it to be more of a natural tall grass environment, not a short grass environment. So anyway, let's start with putting the water into this particular scene. So if I were to render right now, I have some terrain, right? But the terrain ends and it ends, and that's going to be problematic long term. So I've gone ahead and I've already downloaded that water block, which is right here, Ocean 1. Let me go ahead and I'm going to just open it so you can see what it is. Okay. Now, you're probably, the first reaction you have is, why wouldn't you just put an infinite plane down and put the water on an infinite plane?
Exactly.
Right? Sounds like a completely logical thing. Okay. The problem is that you can't put any kind of a displacement or bump map on an infinite plane in Rhino. It will crash Rhino. So it actually won't let you. It'll just render it without it. It'll pretend like it's not there. I pulled my hair out for a long time trying to figure out why it wouldn't work. It's a limitation of V-Ray and Rhino. We need the bump map or the displacement map to make the water look correct. Right? We can fake it without it, but it will never look that good. So as a result, I built up this file. It's a really big dish, so to speak. And if we look at it at the edge, there's a slight curve up at the edges of the dish. Right?
Concave?
Yes, slightly concave. It's hard to see because it's so gigantic.
Yeah.
Okay? It's basically an infinite plane, but I've cheated the ends. Instead of going off into infinity, I raised the ends up slightly. Right? So it looks like a giant bowl if we were to look at it. Right? So if I'm exaggerating it, it's like this. Right? And the idea is we put our building in here, right? And when we go to render, the sky is going to fill up here, and our bowl and our water will fill in the gap.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Not perfect, but this is the idea behind it. Okay? So that being said, I have a layer called ocean. I have a material that's called ocean. I do want to make sure that my ocean material loads correctly. It looks completely goofy, and that's normal. And if I preview it and it shows up there, then we're in good shape, which it appears that we are. I'll go ahead and close that, and I'm going to go ahead and close this giant disk. Right? So we'll go ahead and save changes. Now I'm going to come into my scene, and I'm going to bring this in as a block. So I can go to Edit Blocks, Insert Block Instance, or I can go to File, Insert. It does the same thing. Right? So here's my piece. I'm going to go ahead and find my ocean. And I'll click open, and so all of the details here are fine. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And in this case, I'm going to embed and link the file. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And it will come in. Right? And so there's my little crosshairs. Okay? Now, if I place it really high, if I place it up here, I'm going to get not all of the terrain. Right? If I place it too low, I'm not going to get everything that I want either. So we're going to adjust this, and so let me go ahead and go to Move, Vertical, right? And I'm going to adjust it down until it's definitely covering the ground, and it's filling in, you know, the tide lines to the point where I'm happy. So we'll do something like that, and that then brings in the ocean background. Okay, not too bad. Okay. So let's come back in here. The next piece of this is I really need to start thinking about what's the right rendered view. What do I want it to look like? And so you want to set up your views. And I have one that's I've already saved that I've tried to set up for what looks approximately right for the rendering I want. You're going to, of course, tweak some settings. If I get, you know, this is always hard. Do you render as if you were standing on the ground looking up at the building? Or do you try to render where you're floating in the sky a little bit so that you can see a little bit more of the building? Just kind of depends. You know, you have to decide what you want. Do you want to be a kite looking down on it? What? So you have to kind of play around with what's the right view. I set up this render one view as a good starting point.
Sort of depend on your sky
Right.
file.
It depends on the sky file. It depends on the water file. We're going to do, I haven't done the test rendering with this. If it doesn't work correctly, I may do a scale of this plate to make the edges curve up a little bit higher to fake it. So there's depending on your individual work, we're going to have to tweak some stuff. And at this stage of the game in Rhino and V-Ray, there's just going to be some tweaks to get the right rendered result. Okay, so I have this relatively set up. I'm starting to be pretty excited. But if I look at this, I have some areas in the front here where I'd really like some more grass definition. I'd like there to be some grass sitting in here, right? And so just like I did with the ocean, I'm going to go back to my flash drive, or ultimately you'll go back to the the website, and I'm going to download this bunch grass. Right? And notice that there's a material for the bunch grass, but there's also a background grass texture for like the hills that are further away. Right? It's a low impact grass texture, doesn't have any bump or anything, it just gives some color to the hills when they're far away. And so I have both of those already downloaded. So let me go ahead and jump over to my flash drive, and I'm going to open the bunch grass just so that you can see it. And there's bunch grass. And remember, I always like to open these ahead of time so that you can actually see what's going on and make sure that the materials are applied and they look the way that they should. It also gives you a chance to edit the layers if you're unhappy with the layers. Okay, so if we look at it, you say, wait a minute, that doesn't look all that fancy, right? If we look at it in the perspective view, you say, wait a minute, it still doesn't look that fancy. Okay? All of this is entirely has to do with how the material's applied to these, right? So if I switch into rendered mode, you can see that the grass, right, is upside down, which is really annoying. We'll have to figure out why it's displaying upside down. But you get the idea of it's these intersecting planes that are supposed to provide this material. I have to, just because I'm so darn curious right now, I have to do a render and see if it is in fact upside down or not. No, it's right side up. I don't know why it's showing upside down on these. But anyway, so it's been applied, so we're happy here. I'm going to look at my layers. The grass hill layer, let's call this bunch grass instead. Right? It has grass material applied, the material obviously rendered, so I'll go ahead and save it. And then I'm going to jump over into that file. Okay? So now I'm going to go into File, Blocks, Insert Block Instance, and I'm going to pick the bunch grass. There it is. Go ahead and say OK. And I'll say OK. Bunch grass, embed in link, in case I want to edit something. Say OK. And there it is as a little tiny piece. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of flip around here, and we're going to place it, hopefully, right, onto this surface. Let's jump up. I'm going to jump it to right there for right now, and then we'll do some moves. Move it back this way. Oh, come on. All right, one of the challenges, I'm going to turn off object snap. Thank you. Sometimes your brain just doesn't work, right? We'll move it back a little bit. Right? Sometimes you need to view it in the top view so you can kind of see, okay, it's showing up kind of in that corner. That's about where I want it. I'm going to look at it in this perspective view. In reality, I want this to be a little bit lower than where the hill side is, right? And so I have that. It looks reasonable. Let's go ahead and copy it, right? And I'm just going to make sure that they intersect, and we'll create a bunch of them here. Something like that, right? Then they're relatively flat in this, but this end probably needs to move up a little bit. So you got to do some tweaking. So we'll move vertical, right? We'll pull those up a little bit, right? And in reality, it probably at this point would help to make sure my grass is showing up. Whereas there's my bunch grass layer. Let's put it under the landscape layer, and then I'm going to lock everything. Leave it on. I'm going to lock everything except for the bunch grass layer. There we go. Let me lock these. Make sure bunch grass is active. There. And this is just going to give me a little bit more flexibility in terms of, you know, I can actually just drag these, and I'm not going to accidentally select anything else. So we can make them slightly uneven. Right, something like that. I can take all of these and I can copy them, and I can create a second set, and you get the idea, okay? Where I can build these out and keep adjusting, and I'm going to create this little field of grass, okay? The other option that I have that to me doesn't work as well is you can flow an object along a surface, but the spacing and stuff is a little finicky and you just have to guess at things. So this is a little bit faster, quicker way to make some quick adjustments. In reality, one of my goals long term is to make a Grasshopper script and give you guys your first taste of Grasshopper to apply this across the surface. Every time I've tried to do it, it crashes, so that's why you don't have it yet. So let me move these up a little bit. Something like that. And then what you want to do is you want to go back to your view and see, is it too much, is it too little, right? When I'm looking just at my view, do I need more or less? So we'll go back to set view, render 1, and so I've got the grass there. It probably wouldn't hurt to throw a bit more grass. Come on. Like down over here somewhere. Move. Basically, you have to play around with it a little bit to see where the right spot is. That needs to go a little bit lower, move, vertical. Once again, I have to disable this. Something like that. Okay, not bad. You know, we could copy this. Sometimes using it in a side view once you get close. Let me turn off ortho. Right? And we'll go right up the side here. And let me take all of these. Let me copy them. Right, and we'll work our way out. And again, what we're shooting for is in that render 1 view, do we have enough so that the grass is filling that front, right? And in reality, I need a few more in the back here, so bear with me for one more second while I work. This probably won't be perfect, but we're just going to go for it. All right, let me copy. Wireframe. Move, vertical. Move it up a little bit. A little stash here. Those. Move, vertical. Pull those up a little bit. So anyway, it's not perfect, but I'm trying to rush a little bit so you don't have to sit and watch me adjust every piece of grass. But when I'm starting to look in this view, it's getting there, right? And again, it's all about that view. So I have that view set up. Right? Now the last thing is I need the terrain back here to have something that's going to work for further away. So in my materials, I'm going to load material. I actually believe it's in your Q drive under landscape, grass materials, grassy hill background. And I'll go ahead and open that. And if we look at the grassy hill background, there it is, preview, you can see that's just kind of a speckled color. Right, with a couple different colors. I'm going to unlock the terrain layer, which there it is. I'm going to go to materials. I'm going to apply this. I can do it to layer, and I can apply it to terrain. And I'll say OK. And my guess is it's probably pretty reasonable, but I'm going to go ahead and make sure my texture mapping is OK. It looks like I already have a mapping channel applied, so I'm in good shape there. And so now it's time to go ahead and render it and see how it turns out. And so we're going to give it a shot and see. The more of these objects that you have in, the harder it is going to be for the computer to render. So we're going to let it load for a little bit and we'll see how it does. I can't make any promises as to whether this is going to crash or not.
Did you save it?
I didn't, I probably should have. There are ways of kind of tweaking it and improving it. This was the last render that I did, just so you can get a taste of what's going to happen. We can use something called a V-Ray proxy object on the grass, which will fix things and it will still render well, though it's not as resolved as I'd like it to be to teach in class yet. So let's give it a little bit more time to finish loading up all its stuff. Is the building? Yeah, it's a stucco. I had a stucco that I didn't like, and I was tweaking it before I started lecturing today. It's still not perfect. Yeah, I wanna adjust it a little bit because I think the stucco is a little bit too big.
And the sky and stuff, you have this with
It's one of the HDRIs.
yeah. Wow, and all this is just building the file to do the first three passes?
Yeah, because it's rendering glass and water, I have caustics turned on, which I probably should have turned off. It just makes the rendering more accurate, but it's going to make it a little bit slower. So it's got to get through its caustics, and then it will do a light cache. I have a couple different settings on this. It'll do a light cache to test the light settings, and then it'll do the render. So bear with me. This is probably going to take 5 minutes or so. You guys can start working while we let it run.
When I was making a topo from the sketch file, SketchUp file, it didn't seem like it was the right scale.
Okay. Maybe when you brought it into Rhino in the first place, the Rhino file was not in units or in inches.
Oh.
In which case it would have been off.
Okay. And are you gonna have, like, look like there's some grass growing on top of the wall? Are you gonna delete those? Or?
I'm going to look at what
See
it looks
what
like.
it
And
looks like.
if I don't like it, I'll delete them. If not, I'll go with it. It depends. I want a little bit of grass hanging over, and it may work, but it might not. We're just going to have to see.